How you guys doing? Chapter 7, Airborne, discovering Wes Moore. Chapter 6, we ended with him and Dalio trying to leave town. They had gone into town and were attacked by a couple of townies, he called them. They were been drinking. They called Wes the N-word several times, and they ended up having to run back to campus after Wes's tooth got knocked out. They threw something out of the car at him after calling him the N-word, and he thought about staying and fighting, and what if I win? What do I get? And then what if I lose? What do I get? And he realized that staying and fighting is really not an option, that he needed to get back to campus, and that was his refuge, was these people that wanted him to be successful. A lot of us had problems with that chapter, but we're going to redo that chapter and any of those questions that you might need to redo. So here is chapter 7, Airborne. 5 minutes, the jump master yelled from the front of the C-130 military aircraft. 5 minutes, my entire chalk of airborne candidates yelled back. I stood toward the middle of the C-130, staring at the back of another soldier's helmet. The late summer Alabama heat beat down through the windows of the airplane we'd been packed into for over an hour. Sweat dripped down my face, but afraid to move, I couldn't wipe it off. One of our instructors, we called him Black Hats, opened the door at the front of the plane and looked out to inspect our drop zone. He braced his hands against either side of the door and stuck his head out into the open air, slowly turning from side to side to check for any potential obstacles. I'd gotten used to the 50 pounds of gear strapped to my back, torso, and legs. My bladder was about to explode from the crazy amount of water we were forced to drink to stay hydrated. None of this now mattered. I was about to jump out of a plane. I was 18, and I was about to become a paratrooper. I was overwhelmed with excitement and nervousness. It had been a little more than a year since I decided to take the Army. It had been a little more than a year since I decided to make the Army a fundamental part of my future. At the age of 17, I was coming to the end of my high school career, and I was starting to get recruited by college programs. I had been a starter on the Valley Forge basketball team since sophomore year. I had a quick first step, a passion for defense, and a decent jump shot. I was making a name for myself on the court, and colleges were starting to notice. I spent my summers at prestigious basketball camps like Five-Star Basketball and Eastern Invitational, camps where college coaches prowl looking for fresh prospects. The New York Times had even run a 2-page article on my high school sports career and future prospects. I was toured around colleges by young and attractive guides whose job it was to make me feel welcome and wanted. At first, it made me feel special, as if I were chosen, the girls who admired me to the allure. But the attention was starting to make me cocky. I would sit in my room and practice the grip and grin to get ready for the day of the NBA commissioner announced my name as the Knicks' first-round pick in the NBA draft. I even had some generic lines ready for the interviews I would give to the press. Our team works hard and we play hard. My team puts its faith in me, and I'm just thankful things worked out. I believe we can beat any team on any given day as long as we play our game right. A few months earlier, Uncle Howard had taken me out to shoot hoops at the park back in the Bronx. I was telling him about how if I kept getting recruiting letters from colleges, I figured it'd only be a matter of time before I'd make it to the pros. Howard was still a much stronger player than I was. While I talked about how good I was, he was using his size to post me up down low and then nail a quick turnaround hook shot or layup. His moves reminded me that I wasn't quite in the NBA yet. After we shot a few more hoops, we talked on the side of the court. You know, your game is getting pretty good, and I hope you do make it to the league. Then we would all be living nice, Uncle Howard said with a smile on his face. But you have to understand that the chances are not in your favor. You know how many kids like you want to make it to the NBA? You have to have some backup plans. I took the ball out of his hands, wanting to practice my mid-range jump shot instead of listening to a lecture about my future. Think about it, man, he continued. It's simple math. Only 60 players are chosen in the NBA draft every year. There are 341 division schools, each with 13 players on the roster. This makes 4,433 college players who could declare eligibility for the NBA draft. These numbers don't even include Division II or Division III players, or international players for that matter. It sounds like you've been practicing this speech for a while. I laughed. The dose of reality contained in the statistics had bothered me, though, and I hadn't been able to shake it off since that talk. As I started playing against nationally ranked players at various tournaments and camps, I realized that there were gaps between my talent and theirs. I played hard while other guys played easy with a gracefulness that I lacked. When you step on the court with players like Kobe Bryant or 6'8" point guards who can dunk from a free throw line, you start to wonder if you might be out of your league. You mind Your mind begins to concentrate on other options. I realized that Howard was right. I had to make sure colleges knew my name regardless of my game. Just as military school had slowly grown on me, so had academic life. I actually liked reading. My mother had bought me Mitch Albom book, Fab Five. The book is about the Michigan basketball team led by Chris Webber, Jalen Rose, and one Howard, a team with 5 freshman starters who made it all the way to the national championship game. The Fab Five sported baggy shorts, bald heads, and a swagger I recognized from the streets of the Bronx. I love seeing how the hip-hop generation changed the face of sports, and college basketball in particular. The characters in that book jumped off the page, and I felt myself as gripped by their destiny as I was by my own. I finished Fab Five in 2 days. My mother used it as a hook into a deeper lesson. The written word isn't a chore. It can be a window into new worlds. From there, I leaped into books with passion. Authors across generations, countries, and races illustrated places in the world I had never been and experienced. I had not yet been. F. Scott Fitzgerald, Walt Whitman, and James Baldwin were some of my favorites. Like the hip hop artists I had admired, they brought their hardships alive through creativity, passion, and even humor. I'd spent so much of my childhood feeling out of place. I'd allowed other people to dictate my expectations of myself. I was finally realizing that I could do better than that. I didn't need to have different versions of myself for different people. I didn't have to compromise with white institutions because of my race. I didn't have to apologize to people in my hometown if I wanted to live a life beyond what was directly in front of me. Reading gave me a chance to hear about other Black Americans' experience with race. I started with the autobiography of Malcolm X, a classic for young Black men. Malcolm X insisted that Blacks must love their skin and their culture before they can fight racism. I absorbed Malcolm's words, but there was a sense of separation between his reality and mine. The figure who really spoke to my core, though, was the Bronx own Colin Powell. Both Colin Powell and Malcolm X call for us to change the world. Malcolm X's response to America in the mid-20th century was profound and deeply felt, but he didn't speak to my experiences the same way that Colin Powell did. Powell's autobiography, My American Journey, made me realize how much I needed to understand Americans' history before I could make my imprint on its present. It also made me certain that I wanted to serve in the Army. In this book, Powell talked about going to Woolworths in Columbus, Georgia, and not be allowed to eat there. African American GIs during World War II had more freedom when they were stationed in Germany than they had back in their own country, the very country that they were fighting for. Beginning in the 50s, though, there was less discrimination inside our military posts than in the North or the South. Colin Powell could have been angry and given up, but he didn't. He embraced the progress this nation had made in the military's role in helping that chance to come about. He showed me that the Army could help me and love my country with all its flaws and to serve her with all my heart. Powell wanted what I wanted, a fair shot, a chance to develop his talents, and a chance to live them out freely. The problems of race that Malcolm X confronted have not disappeared by any means. But Powell gave me another way to think about the American dilemma, and more than that, another way to think about my own life. As I started to think about my future beyond basketball, I wondered what kind of person I wanted to become, how I could become that person. How could I follow the footsteps of the people who had the biggest impact on my life? Aside from my family and my friends, the people I most trusted had one thing in common. They wore the uniform of the United States of America. There was my history teacher, Lieutenant Colonel Murrain, who lit a fire in me about the importance of public service and contributing to the communities I had lived within. I sat in front of his class as he spoke about the Constitutional Congress and the Federalist Papers and their enduring relevance of our existence today. There was also There was also Colonel Billy Murphy, the commandant of cadets. He was one of the most intimidating but fair people I had ever met. He commanded excellence from every unit, every platoon, and every cadet. He had no interest in excuses. Effort and hard work were all that mattered. The last time I saw him was when he made a speech at our chapel. He announced that he was leaving Valley Forge to undergo treatment for advanced stage cancer. Then he said something I will never forget. When it is time for you to leave this school, leave your job, or even leave this earth, you make sure that you have worked hard to make it matter that you were ever here. The notion that life is fleeting, that it can come and go quickly and unexpectedly, had been with me since I saw my father die. In the Bronx, the idea that life is not permanent underlines everything. It drove kids to not care about our own lives. It stopped us from caring about what happened to us in our future, and it told us not to bother making any effort in the present. Colonel Murphy's speech presented a different point of view. I learned throughout my life that life's impermanence can be sad and painful, but it can also make, sorry, I'm going to start that whole paragraph over. I learned throughout my life that life's impermanence can be sad and painful, but it is also what makes every single day precious. It's what shapes our time here. It's what makes it so important that not a single moment be wasted. That I believe in what Colonel Murphy wanted us to understand. My next decision became clear over the next few months. I wanted to stay at Valley Forge and attend its junior college. Staying here would allow me to go through the early commissioning process, receive my associate's degree, and become a second lieutenant in the Army. I wanted to lead soldiers. 3 minutes, the black hat yelled enthusiastically. 3 minutes, we replied less enthusiastically. I looked around the plane at the faces of my fellow paratroopers. We were a group of soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, Coast Guardmen, cadets, and at this moment we were united in how terrified we were. For some of us, this was the first genuine military activity that we were participating. For a few, this was the first airplane ride some had ever taken. These few, even after today, still wouldn't have the experience of landing in an airplane, just that of taking off and jumping out of it. We tried to hide our trembling legs and shaking hands with broad smiles and nervous laughter. Our sweat-stained uniforms clung to our skin. My left hand grasped the yellow ripcord for dear life as my right hand pressed against the side wall for balance. That bright yellow cord was my lifeline. If it failed, the parachute was the strap to my belly like a baby kangaroo would be my last hope. A week before I boarded that C-130 for the most memorable plane ride of my life, Valley Forge had selected me to be the regimental commander of the 17th Corps of Cadets. This meant that I was the highest ranking cadet in the entire Corps. Of more than 700 people, I would be responsible for their training, health, welfare, moral, and success. I remembered watching the regimental commander at my very first year of Valley Forge with both fear and awe. As his command, the entire Corps moved. Wherever he stepped on campus, cadets snapped to attention. Soon I would take on that role. At 18 years old, I was the youngest in my group. When I was commissioned, I was told I was one of the youngest officers in the entire United States military. My platoon sergeant would probably be older than my mother. It was one of the leading cadets. But would I honestly be ready at such a young age to lead soldiers? My mind began racing again when a command brought me back to reality. 1 minute, 1 minute. The plane steadied at 1,800 feet as we neared our drop zone. In 15 seconds, my mind replayed 3 weeks of training. When I landed, I needed to make sure that my feet and knees stayed together, that my eyes stayed on the focus of an object in the distance, not on the ground. I reminded myself that at 5 points of contact, hit the ground in order, balls of my feet, sides of my calves, hips, lats, and shoulders. It all sounded easier than it actually is. I was warned when I first started training, jumping from a plane the wrong way and landing the wrong way could lead to serious injuries, even the kinds you can't live to tell about the next day. I concentrated hard. I could do this. Step out with one leg, chin tight against my chest, right hand on the handle of my reserve parachute. Do I count to 3 or count to 4 before pulling my reserve? Which way do I pull the parachute slips? In the wind and the blowing left to right. Shoot, I can't remember. Is that minute up yet? My mind and my nerves were on edge. A voice yelling, "Get ready, Airborne!" brought me back on task. Our black hat told us 3 things to remember when we jumped. Trust your equipment, trust your training, and trust your God. We were seconds away from taking the leap, and I could feel the prayers in the air. I stared at the yellow light from the front of the plane, waiting for it to turn green. I asked God to watch over me and the others in the plane. Usually I started my prayers with, "Dear most heavenly Father and most gracious and everlasting God." This time it was just, "Help. Please don't let me die like this." Before I finished praying, the yellow light disappeared and a green light, one lit right above it. Green light, go. The people in front of me shuffled toward the door like commuters leaving a packed subway car. I approached the open door, 2,000 feet in the air. I'd heard stories about people who, after Black Hat yelled "Green light, go," had tried to stay on the plane, but they were lifted off their feet by the jumpsters and thrown out. You had to keep your flow of bodies moving in rhythm so everyone landed in the drop zone and not somebody's yard in the middle of Alabama. I shuffled toward the door as the line got shorter. My colleagues, I realized, were now flying through the air beneath me. Suddenly, the only person in front of me was the jump master. He stared at me. We were so close that I could see my reflection in his sunglasses. His cheeks were flapping from the wind blowing against his face. I handed him my yellow ripcord, yelled, "Airborne jump master," and turned my body to face the open door. I closed my eyes and felt the air just blow below me, whizzing by. My left leg stepped out over the edge of the doorway. Instantly, I was sucked out of the plane. I heard, "No!" Felt the aircraft speed away. I thrashed around in the wind. It wasn't me who controlled my movements, but the rushing of air. I refused to open my eyes. I was counting to 3 in my mind. Then I felt a sudden jerk in my body, and I was lifted dozens of feet. My parachute had opened. I opened my eyes. I looked up. To see my relief, saw the canopy above me. It didn't have any holes or tears. It was just sailing above me, letting me glide through the air. Beautiful emotions ran through me: peace, love, appreciation. I looked down at the trees waving in the distance and the gorgeous brown Alabama soil that seemed to be rising to meet me. My equipment and the training had worked. My faith was confirmed. As I cut through the sky, the wind whipped against my face. I kept my eyes high, staring at the horizon. I was flying.